Hello, everyone. Um, I know it's quite hot and sweaty, so thank you everyone for still making it here. I'm Bidisha, my pronouncer she and her. Titi's pronouncer he and they, and Jobit's pronouncer she and her. Um, just there are two, three things we'd like to say up front. First, as a panel, we decided not to describe what the Northeast is. We just hope that everyone has some context of where the Northeast is and who we are. The second, that we decided to not talk about conflict, because I think a lot of our lives, we are born into the conflict. We did not just grow into the conflict. We had a lot of experience of not being able to eat the food we want or watch the movies we wanted to, like for Shah Rukh Khan, when Hindi movies were banned in the Northeast. But there was a lot of experience of growing up and being born into the conflict. So we are not going to talk about the conflict today. We thought, actually, as feminists, we'll talk about fun stuff. So I actually, even as a moderator of this session, I do not take accountability for these two. They're quite good friends. But if they go off script, it's not my fault. Just saying this out loud. But we were very sorry that the third speaker, Joshua, could not join us today because in one of these never-ending Bangalore construction work, Joshua has broken his foot, and he'll be. And I was specifically told not to make the joke that Joshua is no longer with us today because he is in Bangalore. But he did send in his thoughts, which I'll also respond to in a bit. But my first question to both Jobet and Diti is that while writing from the Northeast, your idea is to be representative of everything about the Northeast, the culture, the identity, the ethnicity, the gender and sexuality. But we are all also individual people in that. So how do you manage your writing and your life as researchers and writers using different mediums, researching, but not just pigeonholing yourself into the idea of like you are the Northeast writer who has to be representative all the time. So Jobet, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Bidisha. Well, when I begin my writing, I don't tell myself I am from the Northeast, hence I have to write this. That is very important. I think that as a writer, I can occupy many subjectivities, and these subjectivities are very layered, they're complex, and that's the gift that I give for myself. Having said that, I also feel that I do have a responsibility towards my past. So I do take it very seriously. I love taking philosophical undercurrents from my own culture and using that in my writing. And I feel that as far as my culture is concerned, it's an equal to any other culture. I shouldn't have to make excuses for it, whether good or bad. I should be able to represent it without a fear of censure, I feel. So that's what I feel about my writing.
So I think Zobet and I are on the opposite end of the spectrums when it comes to personality. Like so Zobet is, you know, all like very serious. I am a joker. So, like, I don't know. So as a person from the Northeast, I think the moment a person from the Northeast writes, they should be seen as a writer from the Northeast, right? But there's always a but. So, like all stereotypes, they have a purpose. And the purpose is that nobody fits into those stereotypes, right? So, and I've been on panels where I've been told that I aesthetically don't look the part of the Northeasterner, and I'm so glad that three of us are here, not looking the part, looking like misfits. So anyway, I got interested in research and began writing because I couldn't see enough. When I was in the classroom, I didn't have enough reference points for things that resonated with me. So I did. So I thought that I must do that writing. And this was also the time when I was exploring my gender identity. So for people, just to clarify, another stereotype I don't fit is I don't fit the stereotype of a trans masculine person. So yeah. So I think some of the stereotypes that have been associated with the Northeast is the conflict, guns, but also things like the guitar and football and some smelly food, which we, by the way, love, right? So, do these things play a huge part in our lives, like Jobeth said? It probably does, but we are not defined by those things. We are also human beings and we have similar human experiences. Like we also, say for instance, many of us would have faced gender-based violence in our lives. We would have had mental health issues, thanks to the world. Uh, Many of us love food, and not necessarily just pork, like other stuff as well. Um, and many of us fear mathematics, and I want to be able to write about all of these issues. So as far as challenges goes, I think it's a bit complex. So like I said, when I started writing, I wanted to see myself being represented in the writing. So I wanted to see queer and feminist writings from the Northeast. And thankfully today we do have quite a few writers. And thanks to the internet, like we have influencers, young people writing about their experiences of being queer, being trans, and from the Northeast. And thanks to publishers like Zuban, we also see published writing. So one other big challenge that probably might seem like a more internalized challenge is this whole idea of feeling irrelevant, but stay with me, it's not so much just an internal feeling. I think it's also very structural. So, I don't know if you've heard of this film called Ahuni, which is on Netflix. And when that film was made, when it was coming up, it was probably the only Northeastern film that Bollywood cared about. It had Chinese as a Nepali person from Meghalaya. So anyway, and when the film, we were all waiting for the film, but unfortunately, when we watched it, a lot of us from the Northeast had a lot of not so nice things to say of the movie. And then I think through our conversations, we also realized that the problem is that we were expecting that one movie to represent all of us. And it did a bad job, right? So which means that none of us will be able to represent all of us because we are so diverse. So this, I think it's also like a minority stress that stays with us. So when you're making a character, like say a Malhotra from Delhi, you don't need to have like certain stereotypes. That person could be anybody. Similarly, when you are making a character from the Northeast, this person could be a lot of things. It could be the Nirupama Roy, the mother who cries all the time. It could also be like the very flamboyant gay man. It could also be like that comic villain. It could be all of these characters, and it should be all of these characters. Until we don't see enough Northeastern characters, we will keep looking for that one character that represents all of us and fail drastically. So I think thankfully over time I have realized that and stopped taking on that pressure, which feels like a bit of a challenge. Yeah.
Thank you, Diti. Thank you, Jobeth. Just moving on from what you have said, Diti, about how different our food is, how different the different kinds of things that we might want to do but are often burdened with the idea of representation. I'd just like to move on to Jobeth, actually. So Jobeth, as has been told, has been a two-time recipient of the Zuban grant for young researchers. And some of the work that she has done with us has been working on gender, labor, and political decision making, also working on mental health in Meghalaya. So just the connections that Jobeth has drawn from the idea that Meghalaya is this wonderful land of all gender equality to actually talking about Khasi matrilineality and how it ties into political decision-making power, often in like deeply private spaces. For example, the kitchen hearth, where women actually end up making all these decisions, but externally are seen as equal to their male counterparts. So, Jobet, as a researcher from the community, how have you managed to navigate these relationships where there are a lot of potential pitfalls, writing about the community through a critical lens on gender and political decision making?
Thank you, Bitisha. Actually, the work came about when I had moved out of Shillong, and I felt like the experience of moving out also offered me some sort of critical lens with which to look at the things that the context in which I was brought up. Um, I also began to see how the gender division of labor, for instance, was managed, within the house, where you have women taking care of hospitality and things like that, whereas men going out, and they actually say this, like, men step out of the house to work and women sit at home. Having said that, however, I feel that the women have been very enterprising, So if you look at women who run tea shops, for instance, they've been able to use these notions of the hearth, notions that of social engagement that they have found within the kitchen to actually make a living for themselves. And they do very well. So I feel like in such a case, one needs to also relook what feminism is, where you see things that might come across as oppression being used to feed oneself. And I think that's the beauty of feminism also, because it's so polyphonous, and it can, it is inclusive of contrarian points of view, and there's just not one feminism, I feel. So that is what I have to say about it. The other thing, coming to mental health, I had spoken about one of the key precepts that look at Khasi life and living, and that is Kamaya Kahok. And what we mean by that is that one works for righteousness, and we tend to take it quite literally, where, especially now in capitalist context, you have a certain kind of work, like, productive labor, so to speak, being recognized as the right kind of labor. So there are several problems with that, because when you're looking at people with disabilities who cannot work, who cannot do quote-unquote productive labor, then they do face a lot of stigma, right? So I feel in that area, like, our community does have a lot to learn and does have a lot to there needs to be more progress over there, basically.
So, Jobet, thank you for saying that, actually, because I think in the past, post-independence, there has been a real push against the colonial gaze in the Northeast. And while the idea has always been to talk about conflict or fight against conflict, the issues of gender, labor, mental health often gets pushed to the sidelines because there are always quote-unquote bigger issues at hand of the secessionist movement and land and labor. So we are often caught in between all of these movements and lose out on these conversations because all of these intersect in the lives of women and queer and trans people that we know of. But I would like to move on to Diti with the next question, because we are talking also of certain community spaces that are built up by our own principles, our own activism. And Diti's work has started actually from working in queer nationalism, a very, very public idea of queer politics against the idea of the nation state and community and the internal movements in Manipur, to looking at internal lives of queer people through a lovely story called Tiposi Meets the Queen, which Diti is going to tell you more about. But these are the diversity of experiences that we often talk about, moving from public to private spaces. And against that backdrop, in the Northeast, there is a lot of conversation against using Western academic terms to describe these spaces of queer, trans, collectives, because there are indigenous ways of talking about it, of collectivizing, of organizing, of friendship, of love, of romance, that are often flattened when we use a Western academic approach to looking at these relationships. And Diti's work is actually quite interestingly posited at that point. So Diti, how do you see this space changing? Or how do you as a writer and researcher work in this space, challenge these notions of academia? Diti has quite famously told that she got slapped by academia yesterday to me. So please take this with a grain of salt. But how do you challenge this when, there are indigenous ways of dealing with it, and we are often facing so many contesting viewpoints at the same time?
Yeah, so I keep saying that I'm like an interloper in a lot of places. So I occupy spaces without being the insider or being considered the insider in any of this. But yeah. So, very interestingly, because, we've had indigenous identities, and then indigeneity has also been interpreted by people who are in the queer community in different ways. So when I was doing my PhD, which I dropped out of, by the way. So my guide just decided to give my chapter on Manipur to another Manipuri scholar, because, all Manipuris know everything about Manipur, right? So then this woman who did not know the difference between a trans man and a trans woman says, oh, the representation of trans people within the Meitei community that you've shown is not authentic. So, and the reason being that you have used non-Meitei names for all these trans women. And I had to go and pick up a fight saying that, all the trans women I was meeting were calling themselves Jenny and Beyonce and Britney. And it's also probably a way for them to assert their, trans identities. And vis-a-vis, that does not actually take away their indigeneity or their identities, right? So we also are treading this very complicated path of what then becomes authentically to be a certain kind of indigenous identity, and we have had, and then what then it means to take up an identity like transgender, or what does it mean when that identity gets imposed on us in a certain way. So if I have to represent myself within the queer trans movement in most of India, I have to call myself trans masculine, which now I do, because I do. But then there have been spaces where trans people have expressed themselves within indigenous cultures. We have had theatre where, for instance, trans people, let's not call them trans people, gender non-confirming folks have found spaces, or we've had several vocations and professions through which they have, lived their lives in as authentic ways as possible within their context. So yeah, just trying to explain some of this to the academic domain, and then being taken seriously within the academic domain was such a pressure that I just decided to quit. But yeah, so that thankfully now, because I'm not doing academics so much anymore, there's more place for pleasure, which I think academic just sucks out of you. I'm able to do more joyous writing, like you mentioned, Tiposi, and talk about like, issues that are thought of as almost trivial by the academia. Say love, like finding your lover in a protest march or going to the protest march with your lover. Finding friends and family in a context when a young queer trans person, and I'm told I should give trigger warning for things like this. I mean, it's lived reality, so people, trigger warnings feel a little sad sometimes. So when they're dying of suicide and things like that. Like this whole idea of, I'm thankfully able to write, not so much publish, because, hello, publishers want you to represent certain kind of ideas of being queer, certain ideas of being from the Northeast, and probably in that whole gamut, falling in love, or like having to navigate to be the co-signee of, when your partner is in the hospital, which Joshua talks about. Things like those, they feel just trivial.
Actually, that brings me into this next part, which Joshua sent in some written thoughts because he also wanted to be here to add on to it. So I'm just going to read a little bit of it because it also ties quite nicely into what Diti was saying about how queer identities in the Northeast are formed and what kind of push and pull there is, contestations in their identity. So Joshua is a dancer, is a writer, is many things, and everyone I know always knows of Joshua, so I'm not going to introduce him. So here's Joshua saying, part of the reason why there aren't many queer writings, especially from the Northeast, is that people are still primarily fighting for space. Space is important because it provides safety. Many people, including me, need to keep censoring or coding our writing so that we aren't found out. Speaking of multi-layered experiences, those of us living in metro cities get to live a dual existence. One where we get to create, express, dress freely, protest, party, and the one where we return to our homes and conform to society and continue to pass for straight. Not just for our own safety, but for our families to not feel the burn from the rest of society. So although there are a number of interesting thinkers, writers, and poets, we can only know of each other through our aliases. And at that most, a phone call. I have not met many of the contributors to my work or others who have shared their stories with me to transform into comics. Somehow we are building a knowledge system through phone calls, fake Instagram accounts, and deeply coded writing. Joshua's comics actually deal with living as a queer person and navigating the healthcare system, and his chosen medium was comics for that because it also helped shield the identity that Diti was speaking of, and a little bit what Jobeth was speaking of in connecting these ideas of gender, mental health, and labor in indigenous communities that are often difficult spaces to talk about because, again, the idea is also always to talk about the bigger idea of conflict or land and resources. But not to make this a sad party, we'd like to go on to our final question before opening it up for questions from the audience, and that is, one of the reasons why we are here at this panel today is also to challenge the idea of the mainland and the periphery. So in Zuban, while we work, we were quite cognizant that we're a mainland organization which has people from the Northeast working in that. But we are all from Northeast and we don't see ourselves as the periphery. We are the big stars of our own lives. We are at the center stage. The mainland is the periphery for us, actually. So keeping in mind that, what are some of the things that, like both you, Jobeth and Diti, you'd like to talk about or write about? Those are fun and not have to be burdened with the idea that, you have to be representative, you have to have the correct political language, you have to ensure that every single thing that the Northeast as a region has experienced, it has to somehow be relevant or be connected to your writing. So this is just a fun question.
Okay, so actually, there's really no writing that I don't do for fun. I'll, I'll tell you the story about my PhD. I had come out from home. This was my first time from home. And my supervisor has asked me, what do you want to work on? And I remember looking wistfully out of his window and saying, I want to write about longing. So that's usually how I go about my writing. But having said that, I'm very intrigued at this moment with ideas surrounding love and ideas surrounding friendship. These are very important things to me. Also because I feel as though something like love is also is also a skill. Loving is also a skill, you know. And much of who we are, we know what kind of love we want to have, and yet how are we supposed to give love? How are we supposed to receive it? These are important things for me. And friendship, because it's, you know, I've stayed so far away from home and my friends have become family. And I do value those relationships. So how to be a good friend is important for me. So yeah, these are the two things right now.
I'm so envious right now. Most things I write are not for fun. I mean, my work is very cut and dry. But yeah, so now that I'm not in academics, I don't have the pressure of a PhD. I can do most fun stuff. So like Bidisha was referring to, like one of the favorite things that I'm doing right now is creating this character called Tiposi. Tiposi is like a young gender non-confirming person growing up some rural area of a place which has conflict. It is undefined, okay? But Tiposi is also trying to make friendships. Tiposi loves talking to cows. Tiposi does not love making friends, much like me, but likes going on a ramble, much like me. But yeah, so like Tiposi is a character that I've been working on. Two stories from Tiposi has been published. One is in the Riverside Stories from Assam, which is published by Zuban. I am working on a 3 to 4 part series, which hopefully, through a fellowship, which hopefully will get done early next year, which is about this a character, now slightly older as a teenager, finding love in football. Unfortunately, 2 stereotypes have been met. But yeah, like hoping that there are like more multi layers to it. But I also like really want to write about, I was asking Bidisha, how silly can I be? And I want to write about really silly stuff. So like we have a group of 4 friends, and they have the worst poop schedule. Like when you're traveling with 4 friends, I think, like poop schedules matter a lot. And I think that is something that a lot of people can resonate with. So I want to write about Friends of Poopies, which is my half-written script, which is a group, the WhatsApp group that we also have of these 4 friends. I want to also, I want to make podcasts. I want to like draw stuff. I want to actually, like, I'm very interested in feminist gossip, like feminist gossip is something that I absolutely love. So these best friends who come together, feminists start an organization, and then friendships, something happens. I want to know the why, how, what ifs of it. And I mean, not like a scandalous way, but generally like, fun stuff. Maybe like the 2 friends reunite after 40 years of that breakup and laugh about, oh shit, we were 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, and we fought over this. So I want to write about these stories. I also want to archive songs from the movement, which I know is being done to a slight extent. But like through my previous job, I went around and I met a lot of women who are probably community cadres who used to say that, we've written this song in like 50 years back when we were organizing. So I want to document their stories because I feel like a lot of memories, a lot of struggles, a lot of resilience is actually felt through music, through art, and like we were discussing, people who don't have the time and resources to sit and write mostly make songs in the fields while they are working. So I want to, archive some of them.
No, thank you so much. Actually, it brings to full circle about writing about friendship, love, and longing, to writing about unmentionable stuff. And as I said before the panel started, I'm not responsible for these two. They're on their own. But actually now we can open the floor for questions, if there are any. Please feel free to ask questions about the Northeast. Just because I mentioned that I'm not going to explain it doesn't mean you can't ask about it.
And we'll try to our best to answer authentically.
Yeah, my question is to, I think, all of you or only two of the panelists. In all of your discussions, there was a perennial melancholy, there is a pensive sadness to what you are saying, although you are giggling, and there is a sort of, because when we think of Northeast, there are extremes to it. There is beauty and there is violence, there is, food, then there is, disgust to that food. And what I was trying to understand, that you are talking about leisure and want to write on leisure as an emotion which you want to feel within those, how do I put it? So I want to know that in what languages will you write? Because there are many languages. Because you were also talking, both of you were also talking about authenticity. Although authenticity is very, it is almost a farce right now. There's nothing authentic. So do you feel the pressure of writing in your own language? Because it has a reach to an audience which is close to you. And what kind of audience do you want as writers, as authors? What kind of audience? Do you want a mainstream audience, or you want your own audience?
So I need to say this. With great depression comes great humor. So anyway, language has been, at least for me, a big issue. I left the academia also because I was like, I'm writing for a community, but my community that I'm writing for, or like the community that are contributing their stories, are not able to read what I'm writing, and that's, I feel like, really very unfeminist of me as a writer. So that's one complaint I've had amongst the many complaints I have of the academia. But language is something that becomes very important. Unfortunately, I don't write very well in Assamese. I just write love letters in Assamese, which are, my partner doesn't read, so it's helpful because nobody reads them. So, I do feel like, so right now, because I'm writing Tiposi, I'm really struggling with language because I think Tiposi in Assamese. And then to be able to translate in English, especially the whole, it becomes very difficult. So I'm really struggling with it. I'm still figuring out how to do it. One day, I do have friends who write very well in Assamese. So what I would like to do some kind of collaborating writing. Unfortunately, the kind of discourses we have within writing literary spaces is that it also does not allow so much for this kind of collaborative writing. Writing should be this isolated, one-person activity, or like even if you're writing a paper, it has to come in like, okay, this person contributed this person contributed that. So you don't also have, you're not allowed to experiment with writing in so many ways, right? So I mean, yeah.
So my own experience is that I'm not only a writer, I'm also a translator. I've had my translated works published recently by the Chinky Homo Project, and it started out the same way, that a lot of my own people were not having access to my writings in English. And fortunately for me, my father is also a translator. So I decided that I should be able to write in both languages proficiently. And that's what I did. Having come from an English medium school background, it was a little tough at first. It's a different thing, I think, when you're speaking the language as well as from writing it. So I feel that was how I was able to bridge this gap. And I'm, you know, I'm a very privileged person, I know now, to be able to do all this. Yeah.
I just want to add a little bit to your question because I think as Zuban, as a publishing house and as an NGO also, we've started from a writing tradition in English in the 80s when it was known as Kali for women, because then women's writings or feminist writings were not known. But as we moved on, we also realized that a lot of the writings are, or at least a lot of the knowledge is in oral history or oral narratives. And in the Northeast, if you go, a lot of narratives are caught in music, in the weaving. Like there are narratives of conflict that Naga women have woven onto their, onto their mekhlas as a way of history and remembering. So capturing all of that also becomes a larger idea of like how do we look at knowledge production, who actually owns it and who gets to, like what Jobet was saying, that we are all privileged, but it's a part of the colonial imposition of English as the main language, that we were, like if you read and studied in English, you had a chance to escape the conflict, whereas otherwise you did not have a chance. Even when you go to Manipur, their script was removed because Bengali script was introduced to write Meiteilon, which is one of the saddest things about language. In our, like when Diti was saying that Assamese is not like we are not very sure how to write in Assamese, it's because the generations before have faced discrimination because of writing in Assamese that were pushed towards missionary schools, so that now we are like, oh, like, we write in English, and so many people in the Northeast get jobs in hospitality because they can speak in English, but the entire idea of colonial gaze is actually embedded in that structure. So it's a very difficult question to respond to also, because in Zuban also we are like, how do we make this more accessible? How do we make language more accessible? If you're working in the Northeast and we're looking with, like, say, people with disabilities, which language do you speak to? How many people have access to that language? Say in Boro land, you can't do it in Assamese. You have to speak in Boro, and the moment you move a little bit upwards, it becomes a different language. It's interesting, but it's also quite sad. But yeah, I think we are almost at the end. If there's any last question, we might be able to take, and then we'll close the panel.
Everybody, yeah.
Everybody.
The more people buy our books, the more
Yeah.
we'll be able to write, no?
Yeah.
Ask
Please,
Zuban. They're really struggling.
We are really struggling. Yes, true. Please buy our books. We don't have a stall here, but I think we have some online discount going on. So, yeah. And thank you so much, Manorama, actually, for inviting us for this panel. To be able to talk about the Northeast without a filtered lens, being able to talk about frivolous and irrelevant stuff also means a lot to, the younger researchers coming up from the community. So, yeah.